The camera flash flared in Jeremy Prescott's face for the 10th time that night, and he smiled, with the confidence of a man who had finally reached the top. Prescott Tech's launch party filled the main ballroom of the Venetian Tower in San Francisco, one of the city's most iconic buildings, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the illuminated bay. Crystal champagne flowed freely, lobster canapes were served on silver trays, and a string quartet played discreetly in the background. Jeremy adjusted his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo and placed his hand on Giselle Monroe's waist, pulling her closer as another photographer approached. Giselle was everything Jeremy had ever imagined in a woman by his side at a moment like this. Tall, with impeccably waved blonde hair cascading over her bare shoulders, exposed by the red Valentino gown, she possessed the kind of beauty that made conversation stop when she entered a room. Her green eyes sparkled under the crystal lights of the chandeliers, and she knew exactly how to tilt her head for photos, how to lightly squeeze Jeremy's arm at just the right moment, how to laugh precisely enough when some important investor told an unfunny joke. "Darling, Mr. Hutchinson is asking about the next round of funding," Giselle whispered in his ear, her melodious voice scented with champagne and the Chanel No. 5 lipstick that left a subtle mark on the glass she held. Jeremy nodded to Richard Hutchinson, a Silicon Valley magnate whose presence at the party validated everything he had built, or at least everything he believed he had built. "Rich," Jeremy called out, opening his arms in an expansive gesture. "Have you met my wife? Giselle has been absolutely instrumental to Prescott Tech's success." The word wife left his lips with such naturalness that it almost seemed true. Giselle didn't falter. She merely extended her gloved hand to Hutchinson with a smile perfectly calibrated between professional and warm. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Hutchinson. Jeremy has told me so much about you." As Giselle led Hutchinson through the company's technical details, with impressive ease for someone who 3 months prior worked as a corporate image consultant, Jeremy allowed himself a moment to absorb the scene. 300 guests circulated through the ballroom, all there to celebrate him. Investors, potential clients, tech journalists, even some of the Stanford professors who had doubted him when he dropped out of his MBA in his second year to pursue his vision. What none of them knew was that Natalie Prescott, his real wife of 8 years, was there that night. Not among the glamorous guests in the main ballroom, but in the control room at the back of the building, checking every technical detail of the presentation set to happen in an hour. Jeremy had put her there intentionally, claiming they needed someone reliable overseeing the event's technical aspects. Natalie, with her quiet and pragmatic way, had accepted without question, as she always did. Jeremy felt a twinge of something uncomfortable in his chest, but pushed the thought away. Natalie was Natalie. Brown hair always pulled back into a practical bun, discreet framed glasses, functional clothes that prioritized comfort over style. She was brilliant, yes. She had graduated with a degree in applied mathematics from MIT and worked as a financial analyst, but brilliant wasn't enough in this world. Not in the world Jeremy had finally conquered. "Mr. Prescott, Forbes is here," one of the event coordinators whispered in his ear. "They want a quick interview before the main speech." "Perfect." Jeremy shook Hutchinson's hand and guided Giselle through the crowd. She glided beside him as if born for the role, greeting people by name, making small comments that revealed surprising knowledge about each guest. Jeremy had been impressed by how she had prepared for the night, memorizing information about every important person on the guest list. What he didn't know was that Giselle hadn't done it out of dedication to the company, or even to him. She was a professional, and this was just another night of work in her career as a luxury escort. Jeremy paid $25,000 a month to have Giselle available for events like this, in addition to an appropriate wardrobe, corporate etiquette lessons, and briefing sessions on the tech industry. She performed her role perfectly because that was what the contract required. The interview with Forbes went exactly as Jeremy had imagined. Questions about his vision for the future of artificial intelligence, about how he planned to disrupt the predictive analytics market, about his expansion plans. Giselle remained by his side, interjecting occasional comments that made him appear even more visionary. The cameras loved the image of them together, the confident young entrepreneur and his dazzling partner. "One last question," the journalist said, adjusting her recorder. "Prescott Tech achieved something rare in this market, substantial seed funding without going through traditional incubators. Can you tell us about your angel investor? Sources say a single person provided 80% of the initial capital." Jeremy hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was a delicate topic. His main investor had insisted on remaining anonymous, a non-negotiable condition of the funding agreement. At the time, 18 months ago, Jeremy had been so dazzled by the $3 million deposited into his account that he had barely questioned the terms. The lawyer representing the investor had been clear: total anonymity in exchange for the capital and 60% of the company's shares. 60%. Jeremy had gulped when he saw the number in the contract, but what could he do? No other investor had believed in him then. He was desperate, in debt, living on a friend's couch after Natalie had threatened to file for divorce if he drained any more money from their joint account for his crazy ideas. The anonymous investor had been his salvation. "My main investor is a person who values privacy above all else," Jeremy replied with a calculated smile. "I can say that it's someone who deeply believes in technology and the transformative potential it offers, someone who saw my vision when others didn't." The answer seemed to satisfy the journalist, who thanked him and went to mingle with the other guests. Jeremy exhaled, relieved. "You did well," Giselle murmured, her hand finding his. "But we should circulate more." "The people from Sequoia Capital just arrived." Jeremy followed her, but his eyes accidentally met their reflection in the enormous windows overlooking the bay. He and Giselle formed a perfect couple reflected there against the San Francisco night sky, like a magazine cover image. But for an instant Jeremy wondered where Natalie was at that moment, if she could hear the music and laughter from the main ballroom from the control room in the back. He pushed the thought away again. This was his night, his company, his moment of glory. In an hour, he would ascend the stage, set up in the center of the ballroom, and deliver the speech he had practiced hundreds of times in the mirror. He would speak of innovation, of courage, of following one's dreams against all odds. The applause would come, investors would approach with proposals, and Jeremy Prescott would finally be recognized as the visionary he always knew he was. What he didn't know, as he accepted another glass of champagne from a waiter and guided Giselle for another round of introductions, was that in exactly 53 minutes, his carefully constructed life would completely collapse, and the person responsible for this collapse was, at that very moment, ascending the stairs leading to the stage, with a brown envelope in her hands and a small smile on her lips. Natalie Prescott adjusted her glasses and checked the slide sequence on the laptop connected to the main projection system for the third time. The technical control room of the Venetian Tower was small and windowless, lit only by the bluish glow of 6 monitors, displaying different angles of the main ballroom. She could see Jeremy on the central screen, his head tilted back in a performative laugh as he chatted with a group of executives she didn't recognize. The woman beside him, the one Jeremy had introduced as his wife to at least a dozen people over the past 2 hours, adjusted her blonde hair with a studied gesture. Natalie observed the movement with clinical detachment, as if analyzing data on a particularly complicated spreadsheet. No emotion, no judgment, just processing information. She had known about Giselle for 4 months, not because she had confronted Jeremy or hired a private investigator, but because she had found the contract in a poorly hidden folder in the home office they shared in their Palo Alto house. $25,000 monthly, paid to a company called Elite Companionship Services. The terms were explicit: corporate event accompaniment, absolute discretion, public appearances as needed. At the time, Natalie had sat in the office swivel chair for 45 minutes, holding the contract with hands that didn't tremble. Then, she had put the document back exactly where she'd found it and never mentioned the discovery. Because at that point, 4 months ago, she was already 10 steps ahead of Jeremy in a game he didn't even know he was losing. "Ms. Chen, do we have audio confirmation on stage?" The event coordinator's voice crackled in Natalie's headset. "Confirmed. All systems operational." She kept her voice firm and professional, as she always did, as everyone expected her to do. On the monitors, Jeremy accepted another glass of champagne. Natalie counted mentally. It was his fifth in the last 2 hours. He became expansive when he drank. More confident, more careless. Perfect. She clicked the icon in the corner of the laptop and opened a password-protected folder she had meticulously prepared over the past 18 months. 347 documents, funding contracts, shareholder agreements, complete corporate documentation for Prescott Tech, and at the center of it all, the certificate showing that NMC Investments, LLC, the mysterious angel investor, who had provided $3 million to launch Jeremy's company, was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chen Family Trust, established by her immigrant parents from Taiwan 28 years ago. Natalie Marie Chen Prescott. The initials formed the name of the investment firm that owned 60% of Prescott Tech. So obvious in retrospect, but Jeremy had never made the connection. Why would he? To him, Natalie was just the quiet wife who worked with numbers and wore grey cardigans and rarely went to parties because she was uncomfortable in crowds. Except none of that was entirely true. Natalie Chen had graduated with a degree in applied mathematics from MIT at 20, not 22 as Jeremy believed. At 23, she had completed a master's in quantitative analysis that led her straight to one of Wall Street's most exclusive hedge funds. At 25, she was managing a $200 million portfolio. At 26, she met Jeremy Prescott at a tech conference in Austin, a charming and ambitious MBA student who spoke of his big ideas with contagious confidence. They married 8 months later. Natalie was 27 and genuinely in love with the man who had promised to build a bright future beside her. She quit her job in New York and moved to San Francisco to support his dreams, using her considerable savings to keep them afloat as Jeremy pursued one business idea after another. The first 3 ventures failed spectacularly. The fourth never even got off the ground. With each failure, Jeremy grew more frustrated, more bitter, more distant. He began to blame her for being too pragmatic, for not understanding creative vision, for being too boring for the networking parties where he needed to make an impression. The last straw came 2 years ago, when Natalie found him kissing a woman in the parking lot of a restaurant in Menlo Park. Jeremy didn't deny it. He just said he needed someone to make him feel alive again, someone who wasn't obsessed with spreadsheets and budgets. Natalie should have filed for divorce then. Her parents begged her to leave him. Her best friend from college, Diana Wu, flew in from Boston to stage an intervention, but Natalie didn't. Because that night, watching Jeremy apologize with a sincerity she knew was false, an idea began to form in her mind. What if she gave Jeremy exactly what he wanted? The capital to finally succeed, the validation he so desperately sought, the opportunity to shine in the spotlight, but at a price he wouldn't even realize he was paying until it was too late. 3 weeks later, Jeremy received an email from a law firm in Delaware. An anonymous investor was interested in his latest business idea, a predictive analytics platform using artificial intelligence. The offer was generous, $3 million in exchange for 60% of the shares. The only conditions were complete anonymity for the investor, and that Jeremy would remain CEO with full operational authority. Jeremy signed the contract without reading the fine print. Specifically, the clause that gave the majority investor the right to assume full control of the company at any time, for any reason, upon 48 hours written notice. Over the next 18 months, Natalie watched from her position behind the scenes as Jeremy built Prescott Tech. She offered to help with financial analysis, but Jeremy refused, saying he wanted to keep work and family separate, which meant he could spend the investor's money with more freedom without Natalie's oversight on every expense. She didn't mind, because she had secretly hired a team of 3 analysts who reviewed every company financial transaction weekly, because she had complete access to all corporate bank accounts through her lawyer, because technically she owned the company even if Jeremy didn't know it. And during those 18 months, Natalie had also changed, discreetly, gradually, in ways Jeremy didn't notice because he rarely truly looked at her. She started working with a personal trainer 5 times a week. She swapped her thick-framed glasses for contact lenses and let her hair grow to her shoulders. She bought a new wardrobe that hung in the closet of the apartment she had secretly rented in Russian Hill, a space Jeremy didn't know existed. Because tonight wasn't just about exposing Jeremy. It was about Natalie Chen finally stepping out of the shadows. On the main monitor, Jeremy was now talking to a group of journalists, Giselle strategically positioned beside him. Natalie checked the clock. 32 minutes until the main speech. 32 minutes until the moment she had meticulously planned for a year and a half. Ms. Chen, we need to confirm the speaker order. The coordinator's voice broke into her thoughts again. Natalie took a deep breath. Just one change. Add a speaker before Mr. Prescott. Natalie Chen, representative of NMC Investments. There was a pause. The anonymous investor? No longer anonymous. Another longer pause. I'll need Mr. Prescott's approval for that. Check the event contract. NMC Investments has final authority over all programming. It's in Clause 17. She could hear the coordinator typing furiously, checking documents. Finally, confirmed. How much time do you need on stage? 15 minutes. Understood. We'll update the schedule. Natalie removed her headset and stood up for the first time in 2 hours. Her legs tingled slightly, but she moved purposefully to the small bag she had brought, hidden behind a stack of cables. Inside was the dress she had bought 3 weeks ago at Saks Fifth Avenue, an impeccably cut navy Armani that had cost more than she usually spent on clothes in an entire year. 4-inch Louboutin heels, a set of her grandmother's jewelry, cultured pearls that had belonged to the Chen family matriarch for 3 generations. She changed quickly in the bathroom adjacent to the control room, moving with practical efficiency even as she transformed her appearance. The dress fell perfectly over the body she had sculpted in recent months. The shoes added height and confidence. She released her hair from its usual bun and brushed it until it shone, applied subtle but impactful makeup she had learned from late-night YouTube tutorials. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman reflected there. But that was all right. Because the Natalie Jeremy knew, the quiet, pragmatic wife who accepted being hidden away in control rooms during important events, that Natalie never truly existed. It was just a role she had played, a mask she had worn while building something much bigger. Natalie returned to the control room and picked up the brown envelope she had prepared. Inside were copies of all relevant documents: Prescott Tech's share structure, the original investment contract, and a formal letter exercising her right to assume full operational control of the company, effective immediately. 23 minutes until the speech. It was time to go up to the main ballroom. As she walked through the empty corridors leading to the ballroom, Natalie thought of all the times Jeremy had belittled her, all the occasions he had made her feel small and unimportant. But she also thought of something her grandmother had told her years ago, in the weeks before her death. True power doesn't need to announce its presence. It waits patiently, grows silently, and reveals itself only when victory is already assured. Natalie Chen had waited patiently. She had grown silently. And now, as she ascended the steps that would lead her to the stage where Jeremy awaited his night of glory, she was ready for her revelation. The orchestra began a new melody as Jeremy Prescott raised his champagne glass in yet another toast, this time with representatives from Goldman Sachs who were showing interest in a future investment round. Beside him, Giselle laughed with the ease of someone born for the spotlight, her hand resting possessively on his arm. The feeling of invincibility that coursed through Jeremy was almost physical, an electric current running through his veins with every handshake, every greeting, every admiring glance. "You need to tell me your secret," Marcus Chen, one of the Goldman executives, said with an envious smile. "Securing this level of funding without going through traditional rounds? It's practically unheard of for such an early-stage startup." Jeremy felt the familiar discomfort when his mysterious investor was mentioned, but this time the champagne gave him extra courage. Sometimes it's a matter of being in the right place at the right time and having the right vision to present to the right people. The hollow answer seemed to satisfy Marcus, who continued to talk about future opportunities while Jeremy only half listened. His eyes scanned the ballroom, absorbing every detail of his night of triumph. 300 people had come to celebrate his success. His company was making headlines in major tech blogs. There were even rumors that Time magazine was considering him for a feature on young entrepreneurs. revolutionizing artificial intelligence. What more could a man want? Mr. Prescott, the event coordinator's voice broke into his thoughts. The man seemed slightly flustered, holding a clipboard against his chest. We need to talk about a small change in the schedule. Jeremy frowned. What kind of change? Everything's been confirmed for weeks. Yes, sir, but we've just received a last-minute request. NMC Investments would like to have a representative make a few remarks before your main speech. Jeremy's heart gave an uneven leap. NMC? My angel investor? Exactly. A representative named Natalie Chen will contact the production team directly. She's already in the building. Jeremy processed the information, his brain working through the champagne haze. Chen. Natalie's maiden name was Chen. But that was just a coincidence, wasn't it? Chen was one of the most common surnames among Asian Americans. Millions of people with that name in the United States. Besides, the idea of Natalie being his mysterious investor was absurd. She worked as a financial analyst, earning perhaps $120,000 a year. Where would $3 million come from? And why would she hide it from him for 18 months? All right, Jeremy finally said, pushing the unsettling thought away. How much time will this representative need? 15 minutes, sir. 15 minutes? Jeremy couldn't hide his irritation. That will significantly cut into my stage time. Technically, sir, according to the event contracts, NMC Investments has authority over the schedule. It's all within the agreed-upon terms. Jeremy gritted his teeth. Of course, his mysterious investor would have that kind of clause buried in the documents. He should have read more carefully, but at the time he was so desperate for capital, he would have signed anything. Fine, but make sure she doesn't exceed 15 minutes. This is my night. The coordinator nodded and quickly moved away. Giselle approached, her expensive perfume mingling with the scent of fresh flowers that decorated each table. Any trouble? Nothing I can't handle. Apparently my ghost investor decided to make an appearance. That's good, isn't it? Giselle tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the light from the chandeliers. It means they're satisfied with your work. Jeremy forced a smile. Of course, it's great. But something was bothering him, a sense of unease he couldn't quite define. He scanned the ballroom again, this time looking for something specific. Where was Natalie? She should be in the control room, but suddenly Jeremy felt an urgent need to see her, to confirm she was where he had left her. Excuse me for a moment, he said to Giselle, and started walking towards the back of the ballroom, where a discreet door led to the service corridors. But before he could take 3 steps, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. A spotlight ignited, illuminating the stage in the center of the room. The orchestra concluded its current piece and fell silent. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd as everyone turned towards the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the coordinator's voice echoed through the sound system, we would like to begin the formal part of our celebration tonight. First, we have the honor of welcoming a very special guest, the representative of NMC Investments, the company that made all of this possible. Please welcome Natalie Chen. Jeremy froze. No, it couldn't be. It had to be another Natalie Chen, some executive who coincidentally shared his wife's name. Because the idea that his Natalie was... And then she stepped onto the stage. For a moment, Jeremy thought his eyes were deceiving him. The woman walking confidently under the spotlight looked nothing like his wife. She wore a navy blue dress that seemed to have been designed specifically for her body, every line and curve accentuated by perfect tailoring. High heels transformed her posture, adding elegance and authority. The hair he was used to seeing pulled back into a functional bun now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. But it was her eyes that shocked him most, even behind the contact lenses that had replaced her familiar glasses. There was something in those eyes he had never seen before: determination, strength, power. When she reached the microphone in the center of the stage, the ballroom was in complete silence. 300 people waited to hear what she had to say. 300 people looked at his wife with a respect Jeremy had never thought she would command. Good evening. Natalie's voice came out clear and confident through the loudspeakers. No hesitation, none of the nervousness he had always associated with her in social situations. My name is Natalie Chen, and I am here tonight not just as a representative of NMC Investments, but as its founder and sole owner. The murmur from the crowd grew louder. Jeremy felt as if the floor was moving beneath his feet. Giselle appeared beside him, her hand finding his arm, but he barely registered the touch. 18 months ago, Natalie continued, her posture impeccable as she held a brown envelope, I invested $3 million in Prescott Tech. At the time, many advised me against it. They said the CEO was impetuous, that he had a history of failures, that I would be throwing money away on yet another of his grand ideas that would never amount to anything. Jeremy felt the blood freeze in his veins. She wouldn't do this. Not in front of all these people, not on the night that was supposed to be his. But I invested anyway, Natalie said, and now there was a small smile on her lips. Because I saw something others didn't. Not in the CEO, but in the technology, in the team he had managed to assemble, in the market's potential. And because, unlike traditional investors, I was willing to be patient. She paused, letting her words permeate the ballroom. Jeremy could feel gazes turning in his direction, people starting to make connections, realizing exactly who that woman on stage was. Some of you might be wondering why I chose to remain anonymous for so long. The answer is simple. I wanted to observe. I wanted to see how this company would be managed when its CEO believed there was no oversight, no majority shareholder looking over his shoulder, and what I discovered was revealing. Jeremy's heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Beside him, Giselle whispered, "Jeremy, who is this woman?" He couldn't answer. His throat was closed. Words caught somewhere between panic and the growing realization that everything he had built, everything he believed he owned, was about to collapse. "Tonight," Natalie said, her voice soft yet relentless, "many of you have met a woman introduced as Mr. Prescott's wife, a beautiful, eloquent woman who seemed perfectly at ease in this high-level corporate world." Her eyes finally met Jeremy's across the crowd, and what he saw there hit him like a physical blow. "But I am the real Mrs. Prescott, Natalie Marie Chen Prescott. And unlike the professional escort my husband brought tonight, I am not here to look pretty beside him. I am here because I own 60% of this company." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Heads turned. Looking between Natalie on stage, Jeremy frozen in the center of the ballroom, and Giselle, whose professional expression finally cracked, revealing discomfort and embarrassment beneath. And as the lights shone on the stage and his wife held that brown envelope as if it were a death sentence, Jeremy Prescott finally understood the terrible truth he had been ignoring for 18 months. He had never been in control. The silence that followed Natalie's words lasted only 3 seconds, but to Jeremy it felt like an eternity. Then the ballroom exploded into a chaos of overlapping voices, camera flashes, and the sound of champagne glasses being abruptly placed on tables. He remained paralyzed in the center of it all, his feet seemingly cemented to the Italian marble floor. As his mind struggled to process what had just happened, Giselle was the first to move. With the professional grace of someone who had navigated embarrassing situations before, she released his arm and stepped back, creating physical distance that seemed to widen with each passing second. "I didn't know," she murmured, but her words were lost in the surrounding tumult. Then, with a final look that mixed pity and something akin to admiration for the woman on stage, she turned and began to walk towards the exit. No one tried to stop her. The crowd parted automatically, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama between the couple at the center of that disaster. On stage, Natalie observed everything with an unnerving calm. She didn't seem nervous or vengeful, just resolute, as if she were executing every step of a carefully choreographed plan. And Jeremy realized, with a clarity that cut through the haze of champagne and shock, that this was exactly what was happening. She hadn't acted on impulse or emotion. Every movement, every word, every detail of that night had been meticulously planned. "I understand this is a lot of information to process," Natalie continued, her voice cutting through the crowd's murmur like a sharp knife. "But I believe in transparency, especially when it comes to business. So, allow me to clarify some additional facts." She opened the brown envelope and pulled out a set of documents, holding them up so the cameras could capture. "These are the founding contracts of Prescott Tech, As you can see, NMC Investments, my company, provided $3 million in seed capital in exchange for 60% of the common shares. Mr. Prescott retains 40% and remains CEO, but only as long as the majority shareholder allows it. Jeremy felt the blood drain from his face. He vaguely remembered that clause, but at the time it had seemed like an unimportant legal formality. What investor would actually exercise that kind of control? But of course, he had never imagined the investor would be his own wife. Over the past 18 months, Natalie went on, I've observed how this company was managed. I hired an independent team of auditors to review every transaction, every financial decision, every contract. She paused, flipping through the documents. And what I discovered was a mixture of technical brilliance and astonishing fiscal irresponsibility. Marcus Chen, the Goldman Sachs executive, stepped forward, his professional expression now etched with intense curiosity. Ms. Chen, are you suggesting mismanagement? I am stating mismanagement, Natalie replied without hesitation. My husband spent $800,000 on marketing and public relations over the last year. Half of that went to events like this, elaborate parties designed not to generate real business, but to feed his ego. $250,000 went to what he categorized as corporate image consulting. Her eyes met Jeremy's again. An interesting euphemism for professional escorts, don't you think? The ballroom was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped circulating, silver trays forgotten in their hands as they watched the spectacle unfold. Jeremy could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on him, judging, analyzing, dissecting every aspect of his character. This isn't fair, he finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than he intended. You don't know the pressure of building a company from scratch, the connections that need to be made, the image that needs to be maintained in this industry. You're right, Natalie said, and for a moment Jeremy felt a flicker of hope, but then she continued. I don't know the pressure of building a company with someone else's money while pretending it was my own merit. What I do know is the pressure of managing $200 million on Wall Street before I was 30. The pressure of giving up a brilliant career to support the dreams of a husband who saw me as an inconvenient obstacle. She stepped down from the stage, her heels echoing in the absolute silence as she walked directly toward Jeremy. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, no one daring to stand in her way. When she stopped a meter from him, Jeremy could see the details that champagne and distance had obscured before. The fine lines around her eyes that indicated months of sleepless nights, the ironclad determination in her jaw, the complete transformation of the woman he thought he knew into the powerful stranger standing before him. Why did you do this? He whispered, aware that every word was being picked up by the microphones the journalists had strategically positioned. Why give me the money if you were just going to humiliate me later? I didn't give you anything, Jeremy. It was an investment. And as for humiliation, Natalie tilted her head, studying him as if he were an interesting specimen under a microscope. I didn't humiliate you. You did that yourself when you chose to bring a paid escort to your company's launch party and introduce her as your wife. When you spent company money on a life of luxury while keeping me hidden backstage. When you decided that I wasn't enough to stand by your side in your moment of glory. Richard Hutchinson, the Silicon Valley magnate Jeremy had so eagerly courted earlier, approached with an expression that was pure admiration directed at Natalie. Miss Prescott, if I may ask, what are your intentions regarding the company now? Natalie turned to him. And Jeremy saw the instant change in her posture, the smooth transition from betrayed wife to shrewd executive. Excellent question, Mr. Hutchinson. I am exercising my contractual right to assume full operational control of Prescott Tech, effective immediately. Mr. Prescott will remain as a technical consultant, as I cannot deny that he has a brilliant mind for technology. But all financial and strategic decisions will go through me and a board of directors I'll be forming. You can't do that, Jeremy protested, finally finding some strength in his voice through the haze of shock. I built this company. It's my name on the door. And 60% of the shares in my portfolio, Natalie retorted. You signed the contract, Jeremy. You had 18 months to read it properly, to question the terms, to find out who really funded your dreams. But you were so desperate for validation, so consumed by the need to prove you were a visionary, that you didn't even bother to do basic due diligence." She was right, and Jeremy knew it. He remembered the day the contract arrived, the excitement he felt seeing all those zeros in the investment offer. His lawyer at the time, a college friend who primarily dealt with real estate law, had flipped through the documents and said it looked standard. Jeremy didn't push for a deeper review because he didn't want to risk the investor changing their mind. "Furthermore," Natalie continued, now addressing the wider crowd, "I want to make it clear that I'm not doing this out of personal revenge. I'm doing this because I have a fiduciary responsibility to my investment. Prescott Tech has genuinely revolutionary technology. The engineering team my husband assembled is exceptional. But the company was being mismanaged, resources wasted on vanities instead of sustainable growth." Diana Wu, whom Jeremy now recognized as sitting at one of the back tables with a subtle smile on her face, stood up. She had been there the whole time, Jeremy realized, likely invited by Natalie, a friendly witness in hostile territory. "Some of you may be wondering about my qualifications," Natalie said, anticipating the unasked question. "I worked at Goldstein & Partners for 5 years, managing a portfolio of technology investments that grew 42% under my supervision. I left Wall Street not because I failed, but because I chose to support my husband. A decision I now recognize was premature, but one that gave me valuable perspective on this industry." Marcus Chen nodded, clearly impressed. Goldman Sachs would be interested in discussing funding opportunities under new management. "Me too," another investor called from the crowd, and then another, and another. Jeremy watched, powerless, as the same men who had courted him minutes ago now turned to his wife, offering her the respect and attention he had so desperately craved. The irony was cruel and perfect. He had spent the entire evening trying to impress these people, using Giselle as an accessory to project an image of success and sophistication. But it was Natalie, the wife he had hidden and disparaged, who truly commanded their power and respect. "I'll be happy to schedule individual meetings with all interested parties," Natalie said graciously, "but for now, I believe we should allow the festivities to continue, albeit under slightly different circumstances than originally planned." She motioned to the orchestra, which hesitantly resumed playing. The event coordinator, looking completely lost about the appropriate protocol for that unprecedented situation, began to guide people back to their conversations. But Jeremy knew that no one would talk about anything other than what they had just witnessed. His public humiliation would be the topic of every conversation, every article, every social media post before the night ended. Natalie turned to leave, but Jeremy grabbed her arm. "Wait, we need to talk, in private." She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face, and what he saw there made him recoil. There was no anger in her eyes, no cruel satisfaction. There was only a calculated coldness, an emotional distance that was somehow worse than any outburst could have been. "There's nothing to discuss tonight, Jeremy. My lawyers will contact you tomorrow to formalize the management changes. As for our marriage..." She paused, and for the first time Jeremy saw a crack in her armor, a flicker of genuine pain crossing her controlled expression. "My lawyers will handle that too." Then she walked away, and Jeremy stood alone in the center of the ballroom that should have been his triumph, surrounded by people who now looked at him with a mixture of thinly veiled pity and scorn. The party continued around him, but he was no longer its center. He was just a man who had been defeated by his own arrogance, outmaneuvered by the woman he had underestimated. The next morning arrived with a dense fog over San Francisco, the kind of haze that transformed the city into an impressionistic painting where the outlines of everything became vague and indistinct. Jeremy woke up on the leather couch of his Palo Alto apartment, still wearing the crumpled tuxedo from the night before, his untied bow tie hanging from his neck like a physical reminder of his spectacular downfall. His head throbbed with the brutal combination of too much champagne and public humiliation, each throb a painful reminder of how everything had unraveled in a matter of minutes. The phone buzzed incessantly on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with each new notification. Jeremy finally picked up the device and immediately wished he hadn't. 47 missed calls, 123 text messages, and when he opened the browser, he found his name in 17 different articles on major tech websites. Prescott Tech CEO humiliated by investor wife at launch party, screamed the TechCrunch headline. The perfect revenge, how a Wall Street analyst took down her arrogant husband, declared Forbes. But it was the photograph accompanying the Bloomberg article that really hit him. Natalie on stage, radiant and powerful in her navy blue dress, holding that brown envelope like a royal scepter. Hand in the bottom corner of the image, himself partially out of focus, frozen in a moment of absolute shock. The juxtaposition was brutal. She commanding the attention of 300 people, he reduced to a peripheral figure at his own party. Jeremy dropped the phone and pressed the palms of his hands against his eyes, as if he could physically erase the images from the night before. But it was useless. Every moment was etched into his memory with painful clarity. The stunned silence of the ballroom, the looks of pity and morbid curiosity, the way Giselle simply disappeared, her only loyalty being to the check Jeremy would no longer be able to sign. And above all, the expression on Natalie's face when she finally looked at him, not with anger or triumph, but with something infinitely worse. Calculated indifference. A sound in the kitchen made him jump abruptly, his heart racing. But when he stumbled over there, he found only what remained of Natalie in the house they had shared for 5 years. Her favorite coffee cups were still on the drying rack. The calendar on the fridge still marked her appointments for the week. A photo of them at the Grand Canyon, taken 3 years ago during a trip that at the time had seemed to represent a new beginning, remained attached by a heart-shaped magnet. But Natalie herself wasn't there. And Jeremy realized, with a certainty that made him nauseous, that she probably never would be again. She hadn't done it impulsively, driven by momentary anger or desire for revenge. Every step had been planned with the precision of a military operation. The secret apartment in Russian Hill she had mentioned to reporters after he had stumbled out of the party. The team of lawyers already waiting with divorce papers and corporate documentation. The physical transformation that had taken months to achieve, everything had been meticulously orchestrated for this moment. The intercom buzzed, making Jeremy jump. When he answered, a professional and impersonal voice announced, "Delivery service for Jeremy Prescott. Signature required." 3 minutes later, Jeremy was holding a thick manila envelope with the Chen & Associates logo stamped in the top corner. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the seal and pulled out the documents inside. The first page was self-explanatory. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Natalie was filing for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, requesting equitable division of marital assets with specific exceptions for pre-existing business assets. The following pages detailed the new management structure of Prescott Tech. Natalie would take over as interim CEO, effective immediately. Jeremy would be transferred to the position of CTO, Chief Technology Officer, with authority limited to technical decisions. All financial transactions above $50,000 required approval from the board of directors, which Natalie was forming with 3 respected Silicon Valley investors. His salary would be reduced from $450,000 to $200,000 annually, still generous, but a fraction of what it once was. There was also a morality clause. Any behavior that brought public discredit to the company or its shareholders would result in immediate termination and forfeiture of his 40% stake. Jeremy could read between the lines. No more escorts, no more extravagant parties, none of the lifestyle he had cultivated in recent months. The last page was a personal letter, handwritten on Natalie's letterhead. The handwriting was the same he used to see on notes left on the fridge, reminders about appointments or shopping lists. But the words were different from anything she had ever said to him before. Jeremy, for 8 years, I tried to be the wife you needed. I supported every dream, every new idea, every pivot and fresh start. I emptied my savings to keep you afloat when investors said no. I left a career I loved because you said you needed me by your side. And all that time, you never truly saw me. Not as a partner, not as an equal, just as a convenient resource who provided financial stability while you chased glory. When I caught you with that woman 2 years ago, it should have ended there. My parents begged me to leave. Diana flew across the country to stage an intervention. But I stayed not because I believed you would change, but because I realized something important. You didn't fail because you lacked talent or vision. You failed because you were immature, reckless with resources, more interested in appearing successful than in doing the actual hard work that success requires. So I gave you one last chance. Enough capital to finally succeed. Complete freedom to build the company as you wished. And I watched to see if you would grow, if you would take real responsibility, if you would finally become the man you always promised to be. Instead, you spent the money on vanities, hired an escort to pretend to be your wife because your real one wasn't glamorous enough, hid me in control rooms and backstage because you were ashamed of me, and even when you were at the height of what you thought was your triumph, you never wondered who actually made it all possible. I'm not doing this to hurt you, though I understand that it does. I'm doing this because Prescott Tech deserves better management, because the employees who work there deserve a responsible leader, and because I deserve better than to be treated as an inconvenient obstacle on your journey of self-glorification. You still have a place in the company. Your technical mind is genuinely brilliant, and it would be foolish to waste that, but your days of being in charge are over. If you can accept this and work within the new structure, we will have a functional professional relationship. If you can't, my lawyers have documentation ready to buy out your stake at fair market value. As for our marriage, it's over. There's no reconciliation possible, no mending to be done. I signed the divorce papers yesterday. You have 30 days to respond. Please don't make this any harder than it needs to be. Natalie. Jeremy read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into his consciousness. There was no anger in it, no sign of the emotional bitterness he would expect from a betrayed wife. It was clinical, pragmatic, final, exactly like Natalie always had been, he realized. She hadn't changed. He had simply never paid enough attention to see who she really was. The phone rang again, and this time Jeremy answered without checking who it was. The voice on the other end was Marcus Chen, the Goldman Sachs executive from last night. Jeremy, I hope this isn't a bad time. What a ridiculous question, Jeremy thought bitterly. As if there could be a good time after having his life publicly imploded. What do you need, Marcus? Goldman is interested in leading a Series B round for Prescott Tech. $50 million at a $200 million valuation. But it would be under new management, of course. Your wife, or pardon me, soon-to-be ex-wife, quite impressed our partners. Jeremy closed his eyes. $50 million. It was the kind of investment he had dreamed of for years, the ultimate validation that he had created something valuable. And it was finally happening, but not because of him. Because of the woman he had spent years disparaging. You'll have to talk to Natalie about that. She's in charge now. We've already scheduled a meeting for tomorrow. Just wanted to give you a heads up, professionally speaking. She's excellent, Jeremy. Absolutely exceptional. You were lucky to have her by your side for so long, even if you didn't realize it at the time. The call ended, and Jeremy stood in the middle of his empty kitchen, the divorce papers still in one hand, the phone in the other. Around him, the remnants of a life that no longer existed. The photos on the walls of a marriage that had ended. The apartment he would soon have to sell, because he couldn't afford it alone anymore with the reduced salary. The expensive clothes in the closet, the luxury watches, the status symbols he had accumulated to compensate for the insecurities he had never admitted to having. And as the morning fog began to dissipate from outside the windows, revealing the city below in all its relentless clarity, Jeremy Prescott finally understood the true extent of what he had lost. Not the company, though, that hurt. Not the money or the status, though he would miss them. But the only person who had truly believed in him, who had sacrificed her own dreams for his, who had stood by him through all the failures and fresh starts. And now she was gone. Not with anger or drama, but with the quiet determination of someone who had finally recognized her own worth and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. The Prescott Tech headquarters occupied the 3rd floor of a corporate building in Mountain View, a few blocks from the Google campus. Jeremy arrived the following Monday at 8:43 a.m., 17 minutes later than his usual time. It wasn't exactly an act of rebellion, but a consequence of having spent the previous night packing his belongings in the Palo Alto apartment, separating what was his from what was Natalie's into mental piles that revealed how much of her was woven into his life. The parking lot was full, a good sign that the team hadn't been infected by the leadership turmoil. Jeremy parked in the space that read CEO and looked at the sign for a long moment before deciding he could still use it for a few more days. until someone ordered its removal. Small victories, he thought bitterly, though there was nothing victorious about any of them. The lobby was silent when he entered, only the sound of his steps on the polished concrete floor echoing through the walls decorated with motivational posters about innovation and teamwork. Jamie Rodriguez, the receptionist Jeremy had hired 3 months ago, looked up from her desk with a carefully neutral expression. "Good morning, Mr. Prescott." "Good morning, Jamie." He hesitated, hoping she'd say something more, some word of comfort or support. But she just turned her attention back to her computer, and Jeremy realized that the awkwardness wasn't his alone. The entire company had likely seen the articles, watched the videos circulating on social media, dissected every moment of that catastrophic night. The hallway leading to his office felt longer than usual. Employees who crossed his path greeted him with quick nods and averted gazes, no one stopping for the casual conversations that used to fill his mornings. It was like he was a ghost, wandering the halls of his own company, visible but not quite present, acknowledged but not exactly welcome. The door to his office was ajar. Jeremy pushed it open completely and froze. The space that he had left on Friday with its characteristic clutter of scattered papers, forgotten coffee cups, and scribbled sketchbooks was transformed. Someone had organized everything. Documents were stacked in trays, labeled with tags. The bookshelf that once displayed meaningless corporate trophies now held technical manuals and engineering documentation. And in the center of his desk, where his laptop used to be, there was a folded note on cream-colored paper. Jeremy picked it up with fingers that trembled imperceptibly. Natalie's handwriting was unmistakable. "Leadership team meeting at 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Your presence is mandatory. Please review the documents in the trays marked priority before the meeting. N." 3 hours. He had 3 hours before officially facing the new order Natalie had established. Jeremy pulled out his chair and sank into it, looking at the organized trays. The first contained financial reports he should have read months ago. The second held performance reviews of the engineering team. The third was full of pending contracts and agreements awaiting review. This was the real work of running a company, Jeremy realized. Not the glamorous parties or magazine interviews or photo ops with important investors. This was what Natalie quietly did backstage while he shone in the spotlight, keeping the operation running, ensuring there was substance behind the image he had worked so hard to project. He began to read, and as the hours passed, an uncomfortable picture emerged. Prescott Tech was actually doing well, technically speaking. The engineering team he had assembled was exceptional. The product they developed had genuine potential, and there was real market interest. But the profit margins were too tight. Operational costs were inflated by unnecessary expenses. And there were at least 4 contracts Jeremy had signed without proper review, agreements that dramatically favored the other party. At 9:57, Jeremy closed the last file and walked to the conference room. The frosted glass door revealed silhouettes already gathered inside. He took a deep breath, adjusted the tie he had chosen more carefully than usual that morning, and entered. Natalie was at the head of the oval table, occupying the seat Jeremy had always considered his by right. She wore a charcoal grey suit Jeremy didn't recognize, her hair pulled back into an elegant bun that was different from the functional one she usually wore, discreet gold-rimmed glasses replacing the contact lenses from the party. It was as if she had found a middle ground between the Natalie he knew and the force of nature who had taken the stage that night, creating a version of herself that was professional, powerful, and completely in control. To her right was David Chen, no family relation despite the shared surname, a Silicon Valley veteran who had helped build 3 tech unicorns. To her left was Patricia Okonkwo, a management consultant specializing in corporate turnarounds. And scattered around the table were the department heads of Prescott Tech, all looking at Jeremy with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something dangerously close to pity. "Jeremy, thank you for coming," Natalie said, her voice professional and distant. Nothing in the way she spoke suggested they had shared a bed for 8 years, that she knew how he took his coffee, that they had once spent entire nights talking about dreams and plans for the future. "Please have a seat." The only empty seat was at the opposite end of the table, as far from Natalie as possible. The message was clear. He was no longer in charge. He was no longer by her side, neither literally nor figuratively. Jeremy walked to the chair and sat, aware of all eyes tracking his movement. "Let's begin," Natalie said, opening a folder in front of her. "As everyone knows, there have been significant changes in company leadership this weekend. I'm taking over as interim CEO, with David and Patricia forming an advisory board during the transition. Jeremy will remain as CTO, focusing on technical development and engineering oversight." She paused, her eyes scanning the room, but carefully avoiding Jeremy. "I want to make it clear that these changes are not punitive. They are strategic. Prescott Tech has exceptional technology and a talented team, but we have operational issues that need to be addressed if we want to grow sustainably." David Chen leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I spent the weekend reviewing the financials. There is significant efficiency to be gained. We are burning cash at rates that are not sustainable given our current revenue trajectory." Patricia Okonkwo nodded. "We also identified redundancies in our organizational structure. We have 3 levels of management where 2 would suffice. And there are entire departments that could be more efficiently outsourced." Jeremy listened as they methodically dissected every aspect of the company he had built, pointing out flaws he had never noticed, identifying problems he had ignored in his haste to appear successful. It was humiliating but also educational. These people knew what they were doing in a way that he, with all his charm and vision, never truly had. "What about the engineering team?" he finally asked when there was a pause in the presentation. "Are you going to cut there too?" Natalie looked at him for the first time since the meeting began. "Engineering is our most valuable asset. Not only are we not cutting, we're planning to expand, but with a focus on real product development instead of demonstration projects designed to impress investors." The criticism was implicit but clear. Jeremy had spent considerable resources on flashy demos that looked impressive in presentations but added little practical value to the product. It was about appearances again, he realized, always about how things looked rather than how they worked. "I have some ideas about technical directions," Jeremy offered, feeling ridiculous as he spoke. These were his ideas that had started the company, but now he was asking for permission to share them. "Great," Natalie said, and there was something in her tone that could have been kindness or just efficient professionalism. "Why don't you schedule time with the product team this week? We can review proposals at the next leadership meeting." The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, each segment revealing the depth of Natalie's planning. She hadn't acted impulsively at the party, driven by emotion or a desire for revenge. This was the culmination of months of preparation, careful analysis of every aspect of the company, recruitment of the right people to help execute the turnaround. She had been as meticulous in dismantling Jeremy's version of the company as he had been careless in building it. When the meeting finally concluded, the others quickly exited, leaving Jeremy and Natalie alone in the conference room for the first time since the party. The silence between them was thick with unspoken things, 8 years of history colliding with the brutal reality of where they now stood. "Did you read the divorce papers?" Natalie asked, her voice soft but firm. "I did." "And?" Jeremy looked down at his hands, at the wedding band he still wore, though he suspected he shouldn't anymore. "It's fair. Everything is fair. You're not asking for more than you deserve." "I'm not asking for anything, Jeremy. I'm keeping what was always mine. The company, the Russian Hill apartment, the savings I brought into the marriage. You can have the rest." The rest. The apartment they'd have to sell and split the profit, the cars, the furniture, the tangible pieces of a shared life. It seemed so little when put that way, evidence of how little he had truly contributed all these years. "I messed it all up," he said, the words tumbling out before he could censor them. "Not just the company, us. I messed up us." Natalie was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the wood grain on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness that went beyond sleepless nights. "You shattered us a long time ago, Jeremy. I just took time to accept it, and then more time to do something about it. You planned all of this, the party, the reveal, taking over the company. How long ago?" "Since the day I signed that $3 million check." She looked at him directly now, and there was a brutal honesty in her eyes. "I knew there was a possibility you might finally grow up, become the leader the company needed, but I also knew there was a greater chance you'd do exactly what you did. Spend recklessly, prioritize image over substance, treat me as an obstacle instead of a partner." So it was a test. Our entire marriage became a test. You knew I'd fail. "No," Natalie said, and for the first time since she'd entered the conference room, Jeremy saw a crack in her professional armor. "It was a last-ditch attempt to save something we both invested years in building. I gave you all the tools to succeed, Jeremy. Capital, freedom, silent support when you needed it. You chose to use those tools to build a facade instead of something real." She stood up, smoothing the skirt of her suit in a gesture that was pure Natalie, pragmatic and efficient even in emotional moments. "I have another meeting in 10 minutes. The lawyers will be in touch about finalizing the divorce details. And Jeremy?" She paused at the doorway, looking back. "You really are technically brilliant. If you can accept your new role here, we can build something important together, professionally." Then she was gone, leaving Jeremy alone in the empty conference room, surrounded by chairs where people had just witnessed another iteration of his downfall. He looked out the window at the parking lot below, where employees moved in and out of the building, living their normal lives while his was being completely reshaped. And as he sat there in the quiet of the room, Jeremy realized something that should have been obvious from the start. Natalie hadn't destroyed his life. She had merely stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. And now, for the first time in years, he would have to discover who Jeremy Prescott truly was when stripped of pretenses, when forced to build real value instead of just the image of it. 6 months had passed since that night at the Venetian Tower, and Jeremy's office now sat on the 4th floor of the Prescott Tech Building, 2 doors left of the elevator. It wasn't the spacious executive suite he had occupied before, with its panoramic mountain view vista and designer furniture. This one was smaller, functional, with a window overlooking the parking lot and a desk he'd assembled himself, following confusing IKEA instructions. But it was his, earned through real work instead of inflated titles and empty pretenses. Jeremy gazed at his computer screen, reviewing for the 3rd time the code his team had developed over the past week. It was nearly midnight on a Thursday, and he was the only one still in the office, save for the night security guard making his rounds. The months of forced humility had taught him something valuable. When you stop trying to impress people and just focus on the work, you uncover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. The project on his screen was a complete overhaul of Prescott Tech's core algorithm, something Jeremy had proposed 3 months ago during a product meeting. Natalie had listened to his presentation with the same professionally neutral expression she maintained in all their interactions now, then asked penetrating questions that exposed flaws in his reasoning. But instead of simply rejecting the idea, she had suggested he work with the engineering team to refine the proposal. No shortcuts, no superficial demos, just solid, testable work. It had taken 90 days of late nights and weekends in the office, but the result worked. Not only did it work, it was elegant, efficient, and solved problems customers had been complaining about for months. Jeremy saved the final file and leaned back in his chair, feeling a satisfaction that was different from anything he'd experienced before. It wasn't the performative thrill of a successful party or the superficial validation of a flattering headline. It was something deeper, quieter. It was the feeling of having truly built something valuable. A soft knock at the door made him turn. Natalie stood in the doorway, wearing jeans and a simple cotton blouse instead of the tailored suits she wore during work hours. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders the way Jeremy remembered from lazy Sunday mornings years ago, before everything fell apart. She held 2 coffee cups, the familiar aroma of caramel and vanilla filling the small space. "I saw your light on as I was passing," she said, extending one of the cups. "Thought you might need this." Jeremy accepted the coffee, his fingers briefly brushing hers. It was the first physical touch between them in months, and the familiarity of it hit him with unexpected force. "Thanks. I just finalized the algorithm revisions. I'll send it for peer review tomorrow." "May I see?" He hesitated only a moment before swiveling the screen so she could see. Natalie stepped closer, her eyes scanning the code with the speed of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. Jeremy watched her face, searching for signs of approval or criticism, and realized he still cared deeply about what she thought. Not because he needed her validation professionally, though he respected her opinion, but because even after everything that had happened, even after the divorce papers and the public humiliation, part of him still loved her. "It's brilliant," Natalie said finally, and there was genuine admiration in her voice. "Seriously, Jeremy, this is the most solid work I've seen from you. The clients are going to love it." He hadn't expected the words to mean so much, but they did. For months, he had worked under the weight of his own shame, acutely aware that everyone in the office knew how he had failed. But slowly, through small successes like this one, he had begun to rebuild not just his reputation, but his sense of self. And to hear acknowledgement from Natalie, the person whose opinion mattered most, made something within him settle into place. "I wouldn't have gotten here without you pushing me to do things right," he said. "No shortcuts, no pretty demos to impress investors, just real work." Natalie pulled up the visitor's chair and sat down, cupping her hands around the coffee mug. The formality she maintained during business hours seemed to have vanished, replaced by something resembling the person Jeremy had known years ago. "You always had the talent, Jeremy. You just got lost trying to prove something, trying to be someone you thought you should be instead of figuring out who you actually were." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Jeremy took a sip of coffee, savoring the fact that she had remembered exactly how he liked it, even after everything. The city outside was quiet. Only the occasional car headlight sweeping across the street, creating shadows that danced on the walls of the small office. "The divorce papers have been finalized," Natalie said eventually, her voice soft. "My lawyer called today. Just waiting for your final signature on 2 documents." Jeremy nodded, the reality of those words settling heavily in his chest. He had signed most of the papers weeks ago, agreeing to all terms without contest. What she asked for was fair, more than fair considering. But the finality of it, the official acknowledgement that 8 years of marriage had ended, still hurt in ways he hadn't expected. "I'll sign them," he said. "You deserve to move on." "And you? Are you moving on?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Jeremy thought of the past 6 months, the therapy sessions he had finally started after his mother insisted, the long conversations with his father about what it really meant to be a man instead of just appearing to be one, the weekends spent alone learning to be comfortable in his own company. He wasn't where he wanted to be, but he was also no longer the person who had brought a paid escort to that party, who had spent investors' money on vanity projects, who had treated the most important woman in his life as an inconvenient accessory. "I'm trying," he said honestly. "I'm not sure if I know who Jeremy Prescott is when he's not trying to impress anyone, but I'm figuring it out." Natalie smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had directed at him in months. "That's a good start. And you? Did Goldman finalize the Series B round?" "Last week. 50 million at a 230 million valuation. David thinks we can double the engineering team by the end of the year." Genuine pride flooded Jeremy, devoid of the envy or resentment he might have felt months ago. "You've built something incredible here, Nat. You didn't just save the company, you transformed it into something better than I ever could have on my own. Not alone. You brought the tech, the core vision. I just added the missing structure and discipline." She paused, twirling the coffee cup between her hands. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here tonight, not just for the coffee." Jeremy waited, his heart beating a little faster. "David is taking over as permanent CEO next month. It was always the plan, to have him guide the company through the growth stages, which means I can go back to what I really love doing, investment analysis and portfolio management. I've accepted a position at a firm in Boston." Boston, the other side of the country. Natalie moving away, building a life completely separate from his. It was what he knew would eventually happen, but hearing the words made it real in a way the divorce papers hadn't. "That's great," he said, and meant it. "Seriously, Nat, you should go back to where you shine." "Thank you." She watched him for a long moment, as if making a decision. "There's something else. David wants to offer you a position as VP of Technical Innovation. Full salary, stock options, a real budget for development projects. You'd earn it. But if it makes more sense for you to go too, to start fresh somewhere else, he understands. Jeremy considered. The offer was generous, more than he had expected, but more importantly, it was based on real merit, work he had done in the past months. It wasn't charity or pity, it was recognition that he had finally proven his worth. And the idea of staying, of continuing to build something meaningful here, resonated in a way that external accolades never had before. I'd like to stay. If David truly wants me to, I'd like to accept the position. Natalie nodded, and there was something in her expression that looked relieved. Good. The company needs you, just not the you were trying to be before, the real you. The moon emerged from behind the clouds outside, illuminating the empty parking lot and casting a silver light into the small office. Jeremy looked at the woman sitting across from him, this person he knew so deeply, but was only just beginning to truly see. She had sacrificed so much for him, invested not just money, but years of her life into his dreams. And he had repaid her with neglect, with betrayal, with the arrogance of someone who never stopped to question if he deserved what she offered. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate but necessary. "For everything, for making you feel invisible, for squandering what we had, for being so blind to who you really were. You deserved so much better." "I know," Natalie replied, but her voice was gentle. "And you deserved honesty instead of elaborate tests and public reveals. We could have handled everything differently, but I think we both needed it to happen exactly as it did, as messily and publicly as it was, to finally wake us up." She stood up, smoothing her jeans in a gesture that was pure Natalie, pragmatic even in emotional moments. "I'm heading back to Boston in 3 weeks. Maybe we could get coffee again before I go. Not as husband and wife, not anymore, but as people who shared something important and are figuring out how to be friends. I'd like that." At the door, Natalie paused and looked back. "You know, that night at the party when I got on stage, part of me wanted you to fight. For you to stop everything and say you finally understood, that you would change, that you saw me for the first time. Like in the movies." "Why didn't you?" "Because it would have been a lie. Real growth doesn't happen in grand, dramatic gestures. It happens in quiet, repeated choices day after day, like spending late nights at the office refining code instead of going out to impress investors, like going to therapy, like learning to be alone." She smiled, and there was genuine affection in it. "You're doing the work, Jeremy. Keep doing it." Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor, and Jeremy was left alone in his small office with the brilliant code on the screen and a cooling cup of coffee in his hands. Outside, San Francisco slept beneath the midnight fog, blanketing the city in mystery and promise. And for the first time in years, Jeremy Prescott wasn't trying to be anyone other than himself, wasn't chasing external validation or building elaborate facades. He was just doing the work, building something real and finding that perhaps, just perhaps, that had always been enough.